Hello. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Photographic Gallery and thank you all for joining us today. Today's talk on collaboration and representation in visual storytelling is part of the exhibition currently on view at the gallery, The Longing of the Stranger Whose Path Has Been Broken. The exhibition is a culmination of a long-term project, long-term collaborative project led by Rehab, where she, along with the Bedouin community of South Sinai, explored themes of belonging and identity and what it means to be Bedouin today. I'd like to present today's speakers. Rehab is a documentary photographer, visual storyteller, and educator based in Egypt. Her work focuses on the broad theme of identity explored through participatory creative practices. She works on personal projects with NGOs and publications documenting human interest stories in the Swana region. Recipient of multiple prestigious awards, including the Creative Activism Award, Photo Evidence W Award, World Press Photo Regional Award, Premi Albert Camus Award, the Photo from Photo Book Award, and her work has been exhibited worldwide. Today's talk is moderated by Dr. Ronnie Close. He's an associate professor at the AUC. His research looks at the role of image aesthetics and politics in the contemporary world. He has shown film's work in exhibitions, including the Photographers Gallery in London, the National Football Museum in Manchester, and Brighton Photo Biennale in the UK. He had published articles on visual media and critical theory in books, magazines, academic journals, and newspapers, such as Visual Studies, Philosophy of Photography, Madamas, Membrane, Africa is a Country, Photography Reframed, Disassembled Images, among others. Close has written 2 monographs, Cairo's Ultras, Resistance and Revolution in Egypt's Football Culture, and Decolonizing the Image, A New History of Photographic Culture in Egypt. The talk will end at 1:45 and there will be a chance to ask questions at the end. And I'd like to announce that the exhibition has been extended to 26th of October. And now I hand over the mic to Ron.
All right. Thank you all for coming. I'm just getting used to this audio level. And I'd like to thank Rehab in particular for sharing this great work with us. I feel like there's a little bit of the spirit of Sinai in AUC. And I'm just going to ask you a little bit about the background to the project. So could you tell us, how did you get started with it? What were the kind of trials and stages you went through?
Thank you. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Dina. Thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it. So I started working on this project because I didn't even have a reason for it. I was brought up between Cairo and the US, and I used to go to Sinai a lot, because my father is a war veteran. And so he was involved during the occupation, during the war, to retrieve the land and so on. So he really taught us how important the Sinai land is and the native community of Sinai is for the Bedouin community. And so it was very normal for us to, whenever we had the time, to go to Sinai and to connect with the community and so on. But until I became more independent in high school and university, where I was studying photography, I started to create a deeper connection to the Bedouin community, but I didn't know why. But during that time, I started to notice a lot of stigma and stereotypes about the Bedouin community. So I thought, okay, maybe I could use my photography to talk more about the Bedouin community than I know on a personal level, and sort of try to change the narrative. So this is how the project started. But I faced a lot of problems because most of my visual inspiration comes from past visuals who are actually super So it was colonial, and the gazes were, very would romanticize the community and very exotic. But things didn't really go in full gear for the project until I know about my Bedouin ancestry. So while I was, practicing photography with the community, I would say the very early research stages of the project, I was sitting down with a tribe elder who was super curious about my last name that was translated to the word guide, and I explained to him I don't really know, and he started to tell me that there is a Eldalil family who left St. Catherine's, where I was working extensively on the project, and they went to Zenazit, another city in Egypt, and that's where my father was born. So that gave me a lot of questions to my father, who was super closed off, like a typical military man. And he casually said, my father is Bedouin, my mom is Palestinian. And I was like, oh, what is going on here? But that gave me a lot of answers to this, I would say, undescribable connection to the land and the Bedouin community. And from there, the project sort of started to develop for me to sort of reconnect to my ancestry by connecting to the existing Bedouin community. But the project developed to be beyond my story and beyond the community story, and to be something that is more universal. But I'm gonna leave that for the next questions to explain.
Yeah, you've used a lot of representational languages in the exhibition. So we have portraits, landscapes, we have documents of knowledge or objects of knowledge from the Bedouin culture, plants, we have bits of rocks. So there are a number of very different kinds of strategies, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on why you took this kind of approach to do more than just a straight photograph.
Sure. So one of the first obstacles that I felt is that, do I have the right to narrate the story? I mean, if I'm just using the photograph, which is my medium to tell a story, do I have that right? And what sort of narrative am I telling through the image? And I felt that the images were quite flat, context-wise. I felt that I'm sort of repeating the visuals that I've been seeing before. And the people whom I know on a personal level, when I look at the photographs, I feel like they're different. They're different people. So I needed to switch my mindset. I needed to change the term subject to be more of, they're not subjects, they're protagonists of their story. They need to have power over their photograph. So this first stage of the collaboration started by involving the community in how they would like to be photographed and why. So we started to ask a lot what it means to be Bedouin in contemporary times, and how can we translate that into image. So the community started to ask me, I would like to photograph him, to be photographed in that form, while I'm wearing this, or in a specific place. And they always had these, answers to the idea of what it means to be Bedouin. But the question sort of, arised another question in regards to what it means to belong. And the many answers that I got always roots down to the idea of this intertwined connection with the land. For the Bedouin community, their description or definition of belonging is the land. They and the land are one, their fate is one. And I believe this is how a lot of indigenous communities describe belonging. And maybe that's why a lot of us living in urban cities, we don't know a lot about our ancestry, we're not super connected to our roots, we feel this need to look for a place of home, right? And we wander in the world trying to understand where we belong. And so the visuals started to translate that as well. And that was very, very useful to include the community in the conversation and to see how we could translate that into visuals. But the next step was that I wanted to show this collaboration on a visual level. And I gave them cameras so that we could sort of have this visual conversation with cameras and photography, but that is not the medium that many of the community use to self-express generally, right? So I needed to be a bit more flexible, and so I started to invite the community to use their own mediums of self-expression. For the Bedouin women, it was embroidery. For the men, it was poetry. For the older generations, it was plants. But this is super intimidating for any photographer to, you become really vulnerable, you show your photographs and you ask people to add their own commentary onto it using a totally different medium. It's very intimidating, but it's super liberating at the same time. The Bedouin women were very hesitant about getting photographed. Not because there's no trust between myself and them, we're very close, but because how they've been represented before and how they've been seen as they're closed off and very weak and are not really vital within the community, which cannot be even close to reality because women are the breadwinners of their families. They're the ones who work on day-to-day basis, they have a stable job. And the men, because they work on freelance basis, they're the ones who actually care for the children. So they were really hesitant about how they would be seen and how their images would be taken out of context. So the answer was that I started to print my photographs of them on fabric, and then I would ask them to embroider onto it because this is their traditional medium. So every woman started to embroider onto her photograph. Some women, like Nadia, for example, when you would see her photograph here, she's looking to the side, and the agreement was that she would embroider over her face because she wanted to hide her identity. But the surprise was when she gave me back the fabric, the embroidered photograph, she highlighted her profile and asked her, why, are you okay with me using this? And she was like, yes, because I felt that the problem was not my face and my identity, the problem was having this power over my image. And I felt that power. And that was like, hallelujah, Lamina, I'm gonna start this series of embroidered photographs, and that way I'll be able to sort of share the authorship of the work with the Bedouin women. And they started to expand from just their own images to images of their families and their neighborhoods, commentate over a lot of issues within the community, for example, climate change and how a lot of gardens have dried up because of drought and so on. And the Bedouin men, they got sort of jealous over our collaboration, so they started to contribute with their poetry, which is a very traditional Bedouin medium. Bedouin men are super romantic, they just express with poetry everything. And so I started to use these handwritten poetry because I needed something that is visual, and tried to depict them in photographs and create sort of diptychs with the poetry and my photography. And then lastly, the older generations, both men and the women, their answers to what it means to belong was straightforward in that. So we started this series of foraging plants and writing down its traditional uses, also with their handwriting, and that was developed separately to create a field guide. That includes photographs of the plants and information on its medicinal uses.
Yeah, I mean, if we just follow up on that point of the collaboration, but I'm also curious about. Sorry, it's not a reverb. Okay, we'll go back to technology again. Okay. I don't know. So you were talking about this collaborative process, this very I guess, almost organic, right? Something that came from within the community. I'm really curious to know, what has their response been to this body of work? So you published, there's actually, if I can point out to everyone, there's actually an amazing photographic book been published on this. It's another iteration of the exhibition, and I think they're both very different. But I know you've circulated some of the books to how do they respond to seeing these images of themselves in this way?
Great question. They're the ones who actually asked me to do the book. In my head, I wanted the project to be a multi-sensory exhibition. Okay, I wanted, this is sort of like a demo of what I wanted to do, is sort of create all of these different senses for people to go into a space and experience the photographs, but also experience the texture of the embroidery, the smell of the plants, and so on. But the community sort of opened my eyes up to the idea that the exhibition will never live forever. And for the community, this is an archive that is written by them. It's a contemporary archive. And so they needed a physical item to keep. And I'm hoping maybe, 10 years or something, I'll be able to take some of the copies back that was distributed to the community and see feedback and responses that would create a different chapter or a new chapter of the project. But for now, the community was really eager to have a physical item that shows the work that they have done in the project. And so they really, motivated me to do that. It's excitement. The community is super excited about actually being part of the project. Thinking of how I was working on the project before they were involved, and then how I started to work on it after they got involved. It became a lot more free and a lot less limiting, because when you're working with someone that you sort of have all of these questions in mind that maybe you're worried if you ask, you would, embarrass them or make it uncomfortable. But actually, when you involve them in the project, it becomes like super free. كل حاجة مشاع خلاص كله wanted to say that in Arabic, but everything is just out on the table. They know what I want to do exactly, and they help me sort of clarify and answer all of my questions and articulate it into visuals. So it became super, super liberating. So when I got this feedback, they were excited for even to do a book, that made it even more clear, and that made me have, let's say, a clear intention in regards to what I want to do with the project. So they became the main audience of the project, not, art critics or the normal audience as well. They're the primary audience. And so when I was doing the book, I insisted on having it in Arabic. My publisher is based in France, and they were very hesitant about that. But there we had also other arguments in regards to opening the book into from the left instead of to the right, and we had to compromise in order to make sure that the book is also accessible to non-Arabic speakers. But it was just really amazing to have them involved in the project. And Suleiman here became super famous because when I won the World Press Photo Award, they used this photograph of him holding the Khodari plant as part of the promotion. So I would send him photographs of him in Dam Square in Amsterdam, and he has this huge poster of him in front of the old church there. And he was like, this gotta be Photoshop, this is not real. And it's just the idea of, especially Suleiman, because he's the one who got a lot of exposure, because he's also the poet in the book and the exhibition. He felt he was seen and heard, and this is a huge issue. Is so many people who are subjects in photographs and in artistic work and are not part of the creative process. But yeah, I mean, he has now postcards from so many places around the world because WordPress photo exhibited in 90 countries, and he uses them as business cards now. You know, he's an international artist, and it just makes me really, really happy. Musa, who's the one photographed with the flower plant over his mouth, he was part of the launching of the book in Cairo. And he was treated like a celebrity. People asked him to sign the book for them, and when people asked questions about the Bedouin identity, it was only right for him to answer that, not me, because yes, I have Bedouin ancestry, but I was not brought up as Bedouin. I don't even consider myself as a Bedouin diaspora because I was not brought up with that identity in mind. But I'm a stranger, hence the title. I'm a stranger whose path has been broken. I was, forcefully taken from that part of my identity, from that land that would make me feel I belong. And so I have that right to narrate the story, but in a form that does not put me as the Bedouin. So I needed to have the Bedouin community be part of the project and also the presentation. So it was amazing for him to to fly into Cairo just for the launching. It's just really awesome to see how the community have reacted. The end leaf of the book that you see here is by one of the children of the community. It's Muhammad, whose scarf is like throwing the scarf at the photograph inside. And Muhammad is now 19. He's an artist, and he's just really proud to see his drawing back from when he was 10 in a book. So it's I don't know how to explain it more, but it's a privilege to see how they're reacting to the book and the project.
Okay, well, kind of shifting a little bit of our attention away to think about, there's a connection between you, the photographer, the community as the subject, but then us as viewers. You could almost describe it as there's a kind of connection between us as the viewers of this work, the subjects, and you as the photographer. So it has been described as a kind of ethical gaze. So I was wondering, what do you want people to take from this project, the viewer, the audience, when they encounter your work?
Awesome question. So one of the things that I want the audience to take from the project is sort of changing gaze. I always get questioned by, especially audience from like the Western countries, like, did the people understand what you're doing, and do they know what you're doing and stuff? And it's just very condescending. Yes, they know more than I've learned from the community. So it's just the idea of changing how we're looking at Native communities and how we could tell different narratives of them. So for me, the project is a way to show consent and collaboration could take us to another level in documentary photography, expanding beyond traditional documentary work and beyond the authorship of a photographer to include the subjects, to be part of the creative process, can take us to a level where we can tell layered and complicated narratives in a way that honors and respects the communities that we're working with, but also gives a more profound story and a more profound message to the audience, whether they're people from the art industry or not. You're able to take in something that that maybe changes your perspective, and you can also connect to the community on a more human level. They're not they're not showcased for people to look at. There's this conversation, this back and forth conversation with the community, sort of this equal level of exposure, I think.
Okay, my last question. So you state at the end of the book in your essay, you say that this is for future generations and wandering beings. So given the destruction of indigenous communities in Sinai and across the world, what can be done to sustain the life and culture of the Bedouins?
They're a really important and amazing question. I mean, there's a huge issue with being with the land for some reason, you know, like it is with the Bedouin community and also with a lot of native communities around the world, right? This is why there's discrimination to native communities, stereotypes, stigma, and there is sort of this othering of native communities. I cannot say in general, but people, you know, a lot of people, they look at native communities as others, as not modern, because they're simply part of, they have traditions and they're part of the land, and there's a lot of issues in regards to how they react to the land, but we could actually learn from that a lot, right? So I would say that, there's not a linear answer to your question, but I would say having respect to how the different native communities react to the land and understanding the difference, a huge difference between being modern and being Western. Being modern does not contradict with being a connection to the land and having traditions that practices that connect us furthermore to the land, right? Being Western is very different. So this is one. And two, us as visual storytellers, whether we use photography or other mediums, to try to preserve this knowledge and the importance of native lands that are being changed, right? The landscape at the moment in Egypt is being changed drastically, right? It's a huge issue because once the landscape changes, our reaction to the landscape changes as well. And a lot of culture and traditions and knowledge disappear in the process. So maybe as visual storytellers, we need to document this, we need to preserve this, collaborate with those involved in these issues. And in that form, maybe we're able to sort of highlight the problem that is currently happening in regards to the destruction of these sort of lands.
Yeah, as you say it in the book, concrete is spreading. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes for the kind of more set-up discussion, but I think Rehab will be here to talk to anyone afterwards. So I'd like to turn it over to you, the audience. Thank you for your time and patience. And do you have any questions that you'd like to direct towards Rehab about this outstanding project?
Hello. So you talked about. Alright. Okay. Great. Okay. So you talked a lot about you wanted to decentralize yourself from the narrative of the work that they did, but yes, to decentralize yourself from the narrative, but would you talk more about?
Plants definitely have a lot with the topic of the project, the whole idea of belonging and this interconnectedness between people and land, because the community considers themselves the keepers of the land, and the land always gives back for the people to survive, right? So I'll give you some examples. The flower plant that you see in Musa's mouth, when boiled, it is used to reduce labor and period pain for the women of the Bedouin community. And for them who lack, proper medical care, they still use it, And another example, there is the ajram plant. If you put it under the water, you rub your hands, it becomes soap, right? You can wash your hands. And if you put it on your face without rinsing your face, it becomes sunblock. So there's a lot of things. I mean, there is also the il-lasiq. It's a plant that you could find on mountain peaks. And if you got cut really badly, you could just get that plant, you wash it, and you put it on your hand or whatever that wound is, and it gets really stuck. Like, you cannot remove it for 3 days, and after you remove it, your wound is actually healed, and it protects it from from dust and from any bacteria. And it's amazing that you could only find it on mountain peaks, and that's usually where people get hurt, right? So there is this always. There is this always answers from the land that keeps people from surviving despite of all the obstacles. Let me give you another example as well. Between 2010 until 2020, there was an awful drought. A lot of gardens were just dried up, right? You would see the land cracked. And so the Bedouin community, specifically the Jabalaya tribe whom I've been working with, they're in St. Catharines. 80% of their income depends on tourism. So in 2020, when COVID started and lockdown happened, it was a disaster. Like, economically, it was awful. A week after lockdown, a major flood occurred. Remember when Cairo was submerged with water? This was a huge blessing to the community. It was basically a miracle because greenery came back to the land, and the people were able to grow their produce and survive one of the very awful economic disasters that we've been going through throughout the years. So the land always gives back. The land is always the answer for the community. And so it had to be part of the project.
Does anyone have other questions?
Hello. So my question is, I joined a little late, and I'm not sure if you already covered this or not, but I wanted to ask about just introducing the project to the community, their reaction to the camera in your hands. How did you navigate that? Especially, I'm not sure about this as well, if you're part of that community when you're an outsider. Like, how did you manage to get in the community and take photos and do research?
So a lot of the community members whom I've been working with, they know me since I was around 13, 14 years old, and I've had the camera since then. So like, I'm known to have the camera around, and I would take personal photographs of them. Yusuf, who you'd see in the photograph of him in the garden with his hands crossed, I have photographs of him when he was like 4 or 5 years old. So we've become family, basically. But I had the self-consciousness of having the camera with me, especially in private homes, because I understand how it's very sacred to be inside people's homes. So the idea of taking the camera out, I was really worried about exploiting the community, because in parallel to my photographic work, I'm also an activist. So I have a clinic that runs on volunteer basis that provides free medical services to the community. So I was always worried that I would use this position to force the community to be part of the photography project. So I was really worried. But they're the ones who pushed me to do it, basically. And I mean, throughout that process, I became partly based in Sina. So I 2 weeks in Sina, a month here in Cairo, and go back and forth. And that, that sort of, became my life for around 11 years until I got pregnant in 2021. So I became sort of part of the community, but still I wanted to respect the fact that I do have Bedouin ancestry, but I cannot ever call myself a Bedouin. So that always kept me on my toes and really motivated me to research the idea of collaboration. And that's what I made my MA in photography on. It's collaboration and agency in visual storytelling.
There was another question.
I'm 35 now, by the way, so like 13. So a long time ago. Just thinking, maybe I'm 19, you never know.
So we said indigenous communities are usually marginalized or othered, as you said. Do you think women in indigenous communities are even more marginalized, or, like you said, they're actually breadwinners in the Bedouin community? Or it's on the contrary, they're more empowered in small communities or close ones? Thank you.
I cannot talk on behalf of all indigenous communities, but I'll give you some examples. So for the Bedouin community, women are a main pillar within the societal, situation. I don't know. But they're the ones who have a stable job. So they are the ones who every day, from sunrise to sunset, walk the village herd for the herd to graze, but also they collect and forage plants that are then dried up and sold. So they're the ones who have a stable job. If the woman does not go on the herding walks, they do embroidery and create handcrafted material that are sold to tourists or in urban cities. Men, they work on freelance basis, either guides or builders. So you would always see a man, with their children and playing with them while the woman is herding, even if it was her wedding the day before. It's just she has to do that. In my experience, working with a lot of NGOs and human rights organizations around Egypt, if we want to know more about the community, or if we want to tackle an issue and we need the decision makers of the community, we look for the monarchs, the grandmas and the great grandmas. They're the ones who have impact, In an FGM campaign that I worked on with UNICEF for many years, we used visuals that would connect to the grandmas of the communities in south of Egypt. So women always have the short, I don't know what is it called, the short whatever. They have the least of luck in regards to representation, but there's always this. I think with smaller and native communities, there's always this more respect to the women. I'll give you also another example. You would see here 2 images, an image of 3 girls with their hands in the air, and next to it is an embroidered photograph of a mountain. This mountain is called Mountain of the Girls, or Jabal al-Banat. And in the Bedouin culture, there is this idea of storytelling. Using stories, you don't know if it's true or not, but using these sort of stories to create morals for the community to remember, throughout the years. So the story behind Jabal al-Banat is that way back in the past, there were 3 beautiful girls in a village, and the sign of beauty during that time was long, luscious black hair. And they found out that they're going to be forcefully married to 3 other men without their knowledge. And so they decided to go up the nearest mountain, braid their hair to each other, and jump. And since then, the mountain was called the Mountain of the Girls, or Jabal al-Banat, to remind Bedouin communities of the importance of women's right to choose. In that case, to choose to marry, but it's more of a metaphor. So it's super progressive. I mean, you could see a lot of urban communities that consider themselves modern, not as progressive as the Bedouin community in regards to women's rights and voice.
Okay, there's room for one last question. Any more questions?
I've got a question, one more question. I'm going to hog the microphone. Okay, so I'm just thinking, is your project indicative, do you think, of perhaps a new kind of ethical turn in journalism and representation that the mainstream media needs to learn from? Because I think we all know the Bedouins have been seen as traitors within the narrative of Egypt. As an indigenous community, their world has been decimated, and will, there's no sign of any progress anywhere. And COP27 was ironically placed at the heart of this operation. So I'm just wondering, do you feel like there's perhaps in the more fringes of journalism and media producers, that there's a kind of responsibility in some ways to change this narrative?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, definitely. I mean, I teach photography, and I always try to sort of motivate students to rebel against the traditional documentary and photojournalism practice, because I believe that it's outdated. You can never tell a story, a complicated story, especially about communities that have been misrepresented before, through this linear way of telling stories in photojournalism and documentary photography. It just does not work anymore. We need to sort of diversify how we tell stories and how we narrate it. I won the World Press Photo in the open format category. It was the first time that they would have an open format category. World Press Photo have been running since, I think, the 40s or something. And they were super traditional, very typical, photojournalism, taking a photograph in a little girl at war, and it is just, it destroys narratives of communities, So when they launched the open format category, where documentary photographers and photojournalists could apply with photographs that are not done only through photography, it was a big deal. I mean, a lot of the older generations of photographers, they said this is the end of World Press Photo, but I believe this is the future of documentary photography in general and photojournalism. Because this helps you understand that you're not just using different mediums to make the photograph more beautiful. You're using different mediums because you're trying to tell the story in a more expansive manner. And when you do so, you cannot help but open yourself up to collaborate with the communities and to sort of think ethically of how they would be part of the narrative, right? And I think, I mean, ethics in photography is very, or in art in general, is very fluid, right? You need, as an artist yourself or as a storyteller yourself, you need to create your own ethical code. And I think that changes even with every project that you do. But the insistence on collaborating with the communities that you work on only forces you to think of the ethics behind it, because you can never connect with someone on a human level without thinking of how this photograph would impact them later. And and that is something I think was neglected before. A lot of people never thought of how their images would influence those who are in it. But now, after so many years, we see that impact. We could see a lot of people who were photographed in iconic images talking about how these images have ruined them. Like, for example, a lot of images taken in Afghanistan before in Tahrir, right? So, and in Tahrir, sorry. So it's, yeah.
Okay, so we'll wrap this up. Thank you, Rehab, so much for this rich discussion. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you all for coming. We've recorded this talk and it will be available on our YouTube channel soon. I'd like to remind you again, or just say again, that the exhibition is extended to the 26th of October, so if anyone wants to visit. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.